When it comes to a fat loss phase, we definitely want to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to ensure we aren't losing lean muscle and lean tissue as we are losing fat mass. And that's what this presentation is all about. If you've worked really hard in a muscle gain phase or just been training for a decent amount of time and built up some lean tissue, you definitely don't want to be in a position where you're going to chip away at all of that as your energy needs are restricted. So how can we utilize some strategies to ensure that we keep that hard-earned muscle? So let's dive into it. So muscle loss scenarios. Can you actually lose muscle during weight loss? And this is one of those things that's often talked about. A lot of people I've talked to are saying, well, they'll go through a fat loss phase and they're like, oh, I've lost so much muscle mass. I think for a lot of people, in reality, they've just lost a lot of body fat and they didn't realize how much body fat they actually held. So it actually looks like they've lost muscle mass, but in actual fact, they probably had a lot more body fat and a lot less muscle mass than they actually thought. We all hold far more body fat than we realize, and when that comes off, we look a lot smaller. But the reality is, we do lose muscle mass if muscle protein breakdown exceeds muscle protein synthesis. So that sort of protein balance, protein turnover, if that's exceeding, if we're using more amino acids to fuel our body than we are ingesting them for muscle protein synthesis, we may see a breakdown in protein and a breakdown in lean tissue. This also may be a decrease in muscle protein synthesis. So it's kind of not quite clear in the research as yet as to which of these, whether it's muscle protein breakdown increasing or it's muscle protein synthesis decreasing. And it's probably a bit of both, depending on the person's situation, whether they're a lean individual or whether they're an overweight individual. But it may occur basically if insufficient protein is supplied. And so that's really the main one that we want to look at here is, are we increasing our protein? Are we ingesting enough protein? It's also potentially going to occur when insufficient stimulus to the muscle is provided. So your training component. So if you don't have your protein in and you don't have your training, then yeah, there's likely going to be an increase in muscle loss during an energy deficit when we're taking in less energy than we need for daily function. And we're going to start chipping away or start to utilize amino acids, or a combination of both. So during a deficit, protein is used more for fuel as limited carbs and fats are available. So that's why we generally want to increase protein as much as possible to ensure that we are not using our actual muscle tissue to provide that energy. As body fat and glycogen stores are depleted, you rely more on protein as an energy source. So that's losing muscle in a deficit. And it can happen, it will happen if you don't have some strategies in place. Now, on the opposite side of the equation, can you actually gain muscle during weight loss? And there is some specific scenarios where this can happen, but it's not going to happen for the majority of us. First scenario is you are brand new to weight training. So you've only been lifting for anywhere from 0 to 12 months of training, and that's good, hard, structured, progressive training. If you've been training for 2-3 years, but it's been really off and on, or it's been really suboptimal, then yeah, you may still actually gain some muscle mass if you go into a really good structured, progressive and periodized training program. But for the majority of people, it will happen in those first 0 to 12 months of training. So they might go into a fat loss phase and also gain some muscle mass as they train. Second scenario is you are currently very overweight or living with obesity. So someone who is a lot heavier, when they go into a fat loss phase, they're going to have a lot more energy stored in order to reduce muscle protein breakdown or reduce the use of that muscle protein for energy, and they can utilize more of those fat stores and glycogen stores. So yeah, those people may actually gain some muscle mass again if they go into a good structured training program. Scenario 3, if you're coming back from a training layoff, so a period away from training where you've actually lost some muscle mass, you come back to training, go into a fat loss phase and gain that muscle tissue back. So those are the 3 scenarios really that when people gain muscle in a weight loss phase. For everyone else who's not in those 3 sort of distinct scenarios, you're basically going to be targeting weight loss maintenance and you're going to be targeting muscle mass maintenance, muscle mass retention during your fat loss phase. Okay, so it's less about building muscle, it's more about keeping hold of the muscle that we have. How do we do it? 2 steps to maintain your gains. The number one is sufficient protein. I've already chatted about this a little bit, but ideally getting your protein to above 1.6 grams per kilogram of body mass and up to 2.6 grams per kilograms of body mass as well if you want to go on that higher end. And it's going to be dependent on your leanness status and dependent on your rate of loss as well. So someone who is really lean already, a male under sort of 12%, 10% of body fat, they're probably going to want to err on the side of caution and have slightly higher protein intakes. Whereas someone who is overweight or obese, they can probably, reduce those protein intakes a little bit as well. Like I said, intakes should be scaled with rates of weight loss. You can see in this figure here, you've got lean body mass changes on the left, so that's your muscle mass changes. And then at the bottom there, you've got grams per kilo of protein per day. And these are a whole bunch of different starters that are just being plotted here, studies that have been plotted here, so you can see the differences there. But basically what you can see is that the intake of protein should be scaled with the rates of weight loss. So the faster the rate loss, the faster the weight loss, the more protein we probably want to be having. If you can see the top right circle and the circles in the middle there around the 2 and 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight are better at maintaining that muscle tissue than if they were only consuming 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. They're likely going to have some muscle loss there. And then when you look at slow rates of weight loss, those are the small squares. The slower rates of weight loss are able to have a slightly reduced protein intake. So you're looking at that 1.5 grams. It seems that they are able to maintain and if not put on some lean tissue as well. So that gives you an idea of, hey, look, if we want to maintain muscle tissue in an optimal scenario, we want to ensure that we are either one, having a much slower rate of weight loss and consuming around that 1.6 grams per kilo, or if having a really fast rates of weight loss, then we might want to consume a little bit higher than that, pushing up towards the 2.6 grams per kilo of body weight. So a little bit nuanced there, but really the big take home there is just ensure that you're getting enough protein. Hovering around that 1.6 grams per kilo is sufficient for most people, and we'll discuss some more nuances of that to come. The second step to maintaining your gains is progressive resistance training, ensuring adequate load is placed on muscle fibers and encourages muscle retention. Rep strength maintenance should be your focus. So if you are still performing the same weight for the same number of reps, this is a good indication that you're holding on to your lean tissue. Okay, so when you're going to the gym and you've got 3 sets of 8 on the bench press programmed, if you can maintain the same load throughout your entire fat loss phase, it's a good sign you've maintained a fair amount of strength. However, decreases in performance do not always mean that muscle loss is the cause. Other causes are depleted glycogen. So, if you've got a lower carbohydrate status, you're depleting glycogen in the muscle, in the blood, in the liver. You may have decreased performance in the gym because of that. Also, changes in movement patterns due to decreases in body fat. The example I like to give all the time is if someone's quite overweight, they lose a lot of body fat from their back and their glutes. When they're going to do a bench press, they're now going to lose a lot of their declined position if they lose especially weight on their glutes, and they're going to be increasing the range of motion they actually have to take that barbell. If they've lost weight off their back and off their chest, they're going to have to increase the distance they have to lift. So in that case, they might not actually lose muscle mass, but they might lose strength because the biomechanics of the actual exercise are changing due to changes in body fat. So these are reasons why, hey, you might actually lose a little bit of strength during a fat loss phase, but aiming for rep strength maintenance across the majority of your exercise is a good place to be. So fine-tuning some of these strategies, keeping protein high, so at 1.6, and including sufficient stimulus through training will cover most of your bases. But there are some extra points to be aware of, and we're going to cover some of those. 1, don't lose weight too quickly, specifically for already lean individuals. So like under 10% body fat for males, under 18% females. These are very lean individuals already. We don't want them to lose weight too quickly. Generally, 1% of body weight per week is a really good place to hang out. So if I'm 80 kilograms, around 0.8 kilograms per week of weight loss is probably at the fastest I'd want somebody to go, and even down to 0.5% of body weight per week is probably a better place to be if protein isn't crazy high. We want to slow down that weight loss just a little bit. So don't lose weight too quickly. Second one, don't diet forever. Keeping fat loss phases for under 12 weeks is probably a good idea. If you need to do more than that, so you've got a lot more weight to lose, then utilize some maintenance phases. So you might do a fat loss phase for 8 weeks, and then you do a 4-week or 6-week maintenance phase where you learn how to maintain that body weight long term, really essential component of the whole journey. And then you might dip into another fat loss phase for another 8 weeks. So you're utilizing maintenance phases in between to mitigate any potential muscle loss from long periods of time in a deficit. Number 3, eat regular protein feedings. So it's not a bad idea to spread your intake among 3+ meals per day, and to get a serving within 2 hours of when you finish training, so that sort of post-training period, and within an hour or two of going to bed. Not essential points, but probably a good idea to do, and something that's only going to improve your adherence. Having higher protein in each meal spread throughout the day increases satiety and satisfaction from each meal. And within training, you have that heightened muscle protein synthesis response from training anyway. So it's not a bad idea to utilize that to increase protein intake. And there's some preliminary data suggesting that in trained individuals, having higher protein around your trainings is going to help with muscle mass retention as well in a deficit. Number 4, include carbs in large amounts. So we know that carbohydrates are protein sparing, so they're going to reduce the amount of protein breakdown if we're inducing carbohydrates. And of course, if we're having a decent load of carbohydrates before training, pre-workout, this is going to potentially improve performance within that session as well. So if you can improve performance in a session during a fat loss phase, then increase performance, potentially reductions in muscle mass loss due to your ability to maintain rep strength across those exercises like we just discussed before. So if you can do things in your diet to increase training performance, that's going to help you mitigate some of that muscle loss. So that's a great way to do it. Small changes in carbohydrate intake can make a difference in muscular endurance when calorically restricted. Number 5, keep fats at a minimum 0.5 grams per kilogram. So if an 80 kilogram person would be around 40 grams of fat at the absolute minimum, and they might want to creep that up into the 60 gram or 80 gram range if they can. But generally, it's keeping fats at a minimum and keeping carbohydrates relatively high is the goal here. The reason we keep fats at a minimum is for hormone production, testosterone, and to prevent fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies as well. So it's just pretty easy for us to keep those fat intakes nice and minimal, keep them at enough so that we are supporting hormonal production, and then biasing the rest towards protein and carbohydrates so we can not only fuel training, but we can spare muscle protein breakdown or spare muscle protein. And number 6 here, keeping steps high, really important one. High calorie intake means basically it means if you've got higher step count, you can then keep a higher calorie intake during your fat loss phase. You don't have to drop down into super low levels of calories if your step or if your general total daily energy expenditure is higher. So increasing your step count is then going to ensure that you are able to keep those calories a little bit higher and not have to diet on such low intakes, basically what we call high energy flux. So finishing up here, the real big key summary takeaway here is high protein plus weight training equals minimal or no lean body mass loss. And that's the big key takeaway. If you only do 2 things from this presentation, ensure you're keeping your protein at optimal amounts, 1.6 grams per kilo of body mass, work that out for yourself, and then ensure that you are following a structured resistance training program that's providing sufficient volume and intensity to all of your muscle groups throughout the week, and you will be in the best sort of sweet spot for muscle retention. Utilize some of those other steps as well, regular feedings of protein, not losing body fat too fast, and ensuring that we're keeping carbohydrates nice and high and potentially having a carb-based meal pre-training and a protein-based meal post-training are all good strategies to help you to mitigate muscle loss as much as possible.